So it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Shane Krauss, Director of Strategy for Stratos Labs, who will be speaking on the topic of Beyond the Cough, measuring wheeze and other lung sounds in respiratory trials. Shane, fantastic to have you with us today. The floor is yours.
All right, wonderful. Well, I'm going to get my presentation moving here, and we'll get started. So I definitely appreciate everyone. So my name is Shane Krauss. I'm the Director of Strategy for Stratos Labs. Today, we're going to talk about Beyond the Cough, measuring wheeze and other lung sounds in respiratory trials. So have you ever watched a movie trailer or read a blurb on the back of a book and had a clear understanding of the full story and characters and twists and turns? Most likely no. You're only really getting small clips into the story, and if it is interesting enough to watch the movie or read the whole story, it's kind of familiar to me, and I hope everyone out there. Have you ever watched a movie or trailer or read a blurb or a book and just scrolling on Netflix and nothing really excited you, but you kind of read the book or just decided to push play on the Netflix movie anyhow? And it was just an incredible movie. The author and the filmmaker really just missed including the right setting and plot and conflict to get you interested in watching the whole movie or reading the whole book. Opened up your understanding of the story with character, structure, point of view that you did not know existed from a blurb or a trailer. And you may be thinking, why on earth am I talking about movies and books during a pharmaceutical technology conference? Currently, respiratory clinical trials have a large similarity to movie trailers and book blurbs. You're really only getting a small snippet of lung sounds at a very specific point in time. Will you hear that respiratory biomarker that is your trial endpoint while that patient is actually inside of the clinical trial site? Maybe, maybe not. Will the subjective data that you're receiving from the participants' journals or diaries develop into a great data set that will serve as a solid measurement for your trial endpoint? Maybe, but traditionally, mostly not. As 49% of patients underreport respiratory symptoms. Conducting respiratory trials is a lot like Steven Spielberg directing a blockbuster movie. You're conducting the most costly trials to run according to HHS at nearly $115 million across all phases. And as you all may know this, the time and cost associated with these trials means that drug discovery and development are more difficult to bring to market and to get patients who desperately need them. And a major factor to the cost here is the collection of information from the patients about their reports of signs and symptoms like wheezing, coughing, shortness of breath, and then other adventitious breath sounds. That is where technology really comes into play, creating a more efficient collection of data and a greater gain of insight into the actual trial endpoints. Without the introduction of technology, it will be rather difficult to move the needle and reduce that consistent high trial cost. And as we add technology to clinical trials, new areas of improvement are identified, while other areas of emphasis need definite attention. From an improvement standpoint, we're talking about patient compliance. At Stratos, we have a 99.59% on patient compliance with our devices inside of all of our clinical trials combined. The ability to make improvements on data collection, data availability, having that data turnaround time at extremely high so you can make different items on those drugs. And then on the attention side, being able to have the attention brought around the burden on the patient. From a clinical trial standpoint, our device has a 100% compliant on patients utilizing our device. And then looking at a burden on the team, adding technology, but also adding that burden on the team, being able to reduce that, making sure that you're not actually adding any burden on your trial team by adding the actual technology. And when we talk about biomarkers as a proxy of an endpoint, we're in our current state are still relying very heavily on subjective paper-based or digital journals to quantify respiratory symptoms. These journals are subject to variability based on patients' level of education and their perception of the condition. While close clinical and research observations can help reduce that variability and subjectivity, it is also very resource and time intensive. Having a nurse in a clinical trial site watch a participant for 24/7 for symptoms is just not really feasible. So how do you obtain more clinically accurate symptoms? Record those in a low-cost, scalable, real-world setting to improve respiratory trial success. We created it. We created REST, a solution that's patient-friendly and really addressing the key challenges in respiratory clinical trials. The Stratos Respiratory Management Solution, which brings real innovation at the intersection of lung biomarkers, patient centricity, and machine learning. The industry of life sciences can largely benefit from the enhancement of our pulmonary care monitoring capabilities provided by Stratos Labs to gain insight into patient drug response by analysis of longitudinal lung acoustics. Our solution to help clinical trials is based around three fundamentals. Number one is predictability. We have a lung sound AI engine with 99% sensitivity and 93% specificity of detecting coughing from a patient in real time. We have lung sound algorithms for other events like wheeze and coughs that are approaching 95% accuracy. And that is also where the patients are. They're in their home. And that's the exciting part of this solution. And so objective data. So now finally we have objective measurement where we can get from a clinical trial site and to their home a solution that can also be completely decentralized. I have one here, which I'll show you here at the end of the presentation. It's a simple device, which you'll see, be able to simply press start button, and then we do the rest. So you can configure it, connect, and collect. We do all the hard work of identifying changes in lung sounds, where patients are, getting the information back to your research team, and so that they can take action. We've had over 200 patients use our system. We've collected over 8,000 hours of lung sounds and over 1 million data points to date. Lastly, the best part of our technology is it can be scaled across research centers, reduce variability in reports, and develop entirely new insights about respiratory status in connection with the devices and drugs. If we talk about a complete game changer, it's increasing our data collection capacity to heights that we have yet to see, with the exception of our device. Being able to identify what is the patient in privacy and security. Is it HIPAA compliant? Are you going to have a encryption from the data standpoint at rest? Are you going to have it in transit? Are you having a partner that has the ability to have noise cancellation and to create that patient privacy? Are you able to collect that data real time? Not only that, but can you collect it real time and then also have a huge library of lung sounds to be able to look at post analysis? And not only that, but is it going to be easy for the patient? Are you going to have a high patient compliance? So all of those options are what's really game changing for the introduction of Stratos REST into clinical trials. And not only that, but kind of what the whole presence of this presentation is about is looking beyond the cough. There is a lot of clinical trials that are cough as its primary endpoint. Whereas with REST, you can optimize your clinical trials to better capture lung sound biomarkers outside of cough. Rest allows for those clinical endpoints for cough, along with other adventitious breath sounds, to be captured and show positive results. Because the current alternatives to rest is really only counting coughs, while our proprietary technology requires stethoscope quality sounds like wheezing, cough spasms, rhonchi, whistles, shortness of breath, other adventitious lung events, including chest wall movement, which would require, without requiring really any episodic patient intervention. And our passive and longitudinal bioacoustics insights allow us to build a more complete picture of the patient's respiratory status. When we talk about how do we get the data, where does it go, how does it flow? So from a patient perspective, as you can see there on the slide, the device is then Bluetooth transmitted through to a cellular device and then to the actual Stratus cloud, where then all information is encrypted. You can see here whether it's being transmitted into our AI engine and allowed for data retrieval and then to our sponsor data science. But let's kind of move a little bit more into the full somatic experience, if you may, to respiratory trials and why respiratory biomarkers can play an important impact as an endpoint. We're going to look at one of our studies published in the American Thoracic Society. Our study suggests that continuous auscultation may be superior to intermittent auscultation in determining the presence of wheezes in patients presenting with asthma or COPD exacerbation. Clinical validation is top of mind for most clinical trials. This study allows for the technology solution to be compared with the standard of care, the Littmann 3200 stethoscope, and also clinical outcomes. Two board-certified physicians listened to the Littmann 3200 and RESP recordings. This study has similarities of traditional centralized trial, where participants received episodic auscultation versus the benefit of adding technology to give a greater understanding of pulmonary event changes in the participant. As with clinical trials, the collection of lung sounds continues to be limited by the need to have a clinician auscultate a patient directly. This limitation is both geographical and temporal. The geographical limitation is obvious, right? The patient must be in the presence of a clinician for the collection of lung sounds. The temporal limitation is perhaps more frustrating across the globe, is the variety of cough, wheeze, rales, rhonchi that may lead to over or under treatment of patients, while providing endless frustration to junior clinicians who report lung findings that are subsequently really unverified by a senior physician. And so you also have that inner observation variability and use of different terms. As we look at the data recorded and captured in the study, what was significant was the fact that recordings identified more patients with wheezes than intermittent recordings. We noted that 4 patients were detected only in part of the RESP recordings beyond the initial and final segments, and were not detected by the intermediate recordings required through the Littmann 3200. This demonstrates that the current standard of care, intermittent auscultation, your episodic auscultation, which is currently happening in your traditional clinical trials, may miss the pulmonary exam findings that could impact a patient's disposition. In contrast, though, RESP detected lung sound changes in these 4 patients that provided information reflective on the underlying disease process that were not otherwise available with the standard of care auscultation. We observed in 8 patients who had more wheezes per minute after treatment in ED. 4 of those patients, the wheeze rate increased 3-fold after treatment. Yet all these 4 patients had an increase in PDF after treatment, and all 4 patients were still discharged home. And as the rest motion sensors clearly detected chest wall motion consistent with breathing, these patients were really not moving air prior to treatment, which really is illustrated to us that the motion sensor data provides a powerful additional information on the respiratory status and potential treatment outcomes. In closing, rather than small snapshots that are currently happening at clinical sites, you get continuous longitudinal data, AKA the full movie production, if you may, for post-processing and analysis that happened in a remote real-world setting with the Stratos Labs device. So today, Stratos Labs has a unique opportunity to stand as a leader in the respiratory health. Our clinically validated bioacoustic library of sounds and our AI engine is the world's largest entirely hands-free clinical grade data set, enabling Stratos Labs to be the standard bearer of acoustic digital biomarkers for clinical research and really respiratory care globally. I would like to thank you all for this session, Beyond the Cough, Measuring Wheeze and Other Sound in Clinical Trials. You may feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any interest in learning more about Stratos Labs and our clinical trial solution. And I'm going to show you just a brief view. You're welcome to also connect with me via LinkedIn if you choose that route also. I would like you to follow Stratos Labs on LinkedIn and other social media channels. And then I'll give you a quick glimpse into our post-analysis portal where you can take a glimpse. There won't be any sound, but you'll actually be able to see a little bit of our events here. So with our clinical trial, it's going to see here, you'll be able to see this validated as it rolls through. And in our AI engine, it is identifying these items as single coughs. And so this is what your ending analysis would be with Stratos Labs. And that concludes my time here today.
Thank you so much for that, Shane. Very insightful indeed.